upside down.
The mastery of the winds and currents that have brought the Portuguese south to the West African coast also took Spanish and Portuguese ships west to a new world on the other side of the Atlantic. In 1500, the Portuguese landed in what's today Brazil. Portugal was expanding and its empire was growing. The world was experiencing epochal change. A triangular Atlantic economy would link Europe and its African trading partners with the new lands in the Americas, which offered enormous opportunities for mining silver and gold, for growing sugar and tobacco, and manufacturing rum. Demand for these products would be seemingly insatiable, fueling the desire to maximize profits through a large, cheap labor force.
The demand for labor, large numbers of people to work in the plantations and the mines of the New World, producing sugar, producing tobacco, producing cotton. The large demand for labor was not fulfilled through the use of the indigenous people.
Congo's admiration for Portuguese culture was expressed in their embrace of Christianity and desire to be part of the community of Christian nations. Ironically, the principal commodity that Congo possessed to pay for its social engineering was slaves. In 1575, Portuguese did something that no other European colonial power had thought to do. They made a deal with the King of Congo to create their own city, which became the city of Luanda. Why was this important? Because they could use this as a base to capture Africans whom they used as slaves themselves in Luanda, but also to capture Africans whom they sold across the ocean in the transatlantic slave trade. It was a brilliant commercial move. More and more slaves were channeled through the port of Luanda, eventually leading to an astonishing total number of 1.4 million.
They were hooked. They were hooked on commodities.
Hooked.
And if it meant having a few more wars to get a few more captives to sell to the Portuguese, which turned out to be a lot more wars and a lot more captives, then that was fine.
It was a trade that for the African kingdoms had tremendous importance because of the ambition of the African kings to participate in the commercial and diplomatic and political network of the Atlantic world, and the main currency that they had at their disposal was the enslaved labor.
The Portuguese came to Luanda with the blessing of the King of Congo, entering into an alliance with the Kingdom of Ndongo. That alliance didn't last, and in 1579, the King of Ndongo attacked the Portuguese, setting off a conflict that would last nearly a century.
Those wars eventually produced a vast quantity of slaves, and it was this huge wave of slaves that became available through Portuguese, basically Portuguese conquest, Portuguese direct military efforts in this area that fired up the Brazilian sugar industry.
Ndongo had fought Portugal to a standstill by 1600, but the Portuguese brought up bands of fighters from the south, the Imbangala, the ferocious warriors and mercenaries purported by the Portuguese to be cannibals. They helped the Portuguese to win many battles against Ndongo. Out of this chaos would emerge one of the most charismatic and enduring characters in all of African history. A fearless warrior queen and formidable politician who remains an icon in Angola today. In her lifetime, she ruled over two powerful kingdoms, Ndongo and Matamba. Her name was Zinga. In 1622, after several years of fierce fighting with the Portuguese, Zinga was dispatched by her brother, the king, Golombandi, to negotiate a peace settlement with the Portuguese governor, but not to surrender. When Zinga arrived at the meeting, she wasn't accorded the treatment she expected as a representative of an independent kingdom. What Zinga did next has become the stuff of legend, a symbol of African pride and resistance in the face of attempts at European domination.
She arrives for her audience with the governor, and he's sitting in the Portuguese style velvet chair, and she enters the room and sees that they had prepared cushions and carpet for her to sit on the ground. And at that point, she looks over at one of her attendants, who goes and crouches on the floor. And Jinga sits on her at the same height as the governor.
So she confronted the governor eye to eye.
Exactly, eye to eye.
By the end of her trip to Luanda, Zinga had won significant concessions from the Portuguese. In return, she agreed to convert to Christianity. She had proven to be a supremely able negotiator.
She said, how can you demand tribute of someone who is free? Who, my state is free. And she was very persuasive. And she was able to get the governor and the Portuguese to agree to the terms that they will remove the troops from Ndongo.
2 years later, in 1624, Zinga's brother, the king, unable to defeat the Portuguese, by some accounts, was poisoned. By other accounts, he committed suicide.
When the throne suddenly became vacant, Zinga became one of the contested successors. And with the support of the army and a few other key allies, not surprisingly, she emerged victorious.
Although the Portuguese were impressed with Zinga as an ambassador, they didn't want her to be the monarch.
The Portuguese did not want Jinga to be queen because they knew that she was going to insist on being on Ndongo being independent. Their argument was that Jinga, being a female, was not eligible to rule.
Portuguese backed some of Zinga's subordinates, and she was ousted in a war waged against her in 1626. But Zinga refused to fade away.
From 1626 to 1657, she kept fighting the Portuguese.
Now deposed, Zinga conquered the independent kingdom of Matamba. As ruler of Matamba, she began to assemble an army and pragmatically joined forces with her former enemy, the martial and reputedly cannibalistic Mbangala.
She had to be strategically very astute. Even though she became an Mbangala, she insisted that she never actually consumed human flesh or joined in many of the rituals.
When the king of Congo, Garcia II, invited the Dutch to invade Angola, Zinga immediately contacted the Dutch to join them. Both Garcia and Zinga wanted the Portuguese out of Angola and saw the benefits of an alliance with the Dutch.
So it's a time when the Dutch are in Brazil and are trying to establish a colony of their own there. And again, there is no Brazil without Angola. So they need to seize Luanda as the source of enslaved labor. And Jinga, as well as the King of Congo, really take the opportunity to plot and ally themselves with the Dutch against the Portuguese in the enemies of my enemies are my friends.
The Portuguese were pushed out of Luanda by the Dutch in Congo. The Dutch captured the city, but the Portuguese retreated to inland forts and kept the war going. The struggle was now mostly between Zinga and the Portuguese.
One of the misconceptions about Nzinga is that she was anti-colonial, meaning she didn't want Europeans to be on the African continent. But isn't it true that she just didn't want them trying to capture her kingdom?
She was not pushing away European colonialism. She was just trying to control her territory and control the means by which she could remain queen.
In 1657, Zinga and the Portuguese negotiated a truce. After 30 years of war, she had won back part of her original kingdom. Now she was Queen of Ndongo and Queen of Matamba. 6 years later, at the age of 81, Zinga, still a devout Christian, died.
I think she died having really changed the region. In her claims to the throne really created a new creation myth for the kingdom of Ndongo and Matamba. And one testament of it is after her, for about the 100 years after her death, the kingdom of Matamba was ruled by women.
The combination of avarice, aggression, and warfare would make Angola the single largest source of slaves by far in the history of the transatlantic slave trade.
Far more slaves were shipped to the New World
from West Central Africa than from any other part of the continent. That's 5.7 million people over roughly 350 years. Most of those went to South America. But about 24% of the ancestors of the African American people came from this region too. Incredibly, 2.8 million Africans shipped from Luanda alone. If we add another 800,000 from the nearby city of Benguela, that means a quarter of all slaves across the Atlantic Ocean started their journey from what is today the country of Angola.